They say love blinds you, but what if you've already seen the darkness behind the mask? This time, I wouldn't be fooled so easily. It was a warm evening, the golden glow of the sunset spilling across the terrace. The sound of soft music mixed with the gentle rustling of the wind. The setting was perfect, too perfect. My heart hammered against my chest as I watched him kneel before me, a velvet box resting in his hand. His dark eyes gleamed under the fading light, filled with promises that seemed almost too good to be true. "Will you marry me?" His voice was steady, charming as always. My breath hitched. The scene felt painfully familiar, like I had already lived this moment before. Because I had. In my past life, I had stood in this very spot, wearing the same hopeful expression. Back then, I believed in the sincerity behind those eyes. I thought he loved me, but I was wrong. My hands trembled as I glanced down at the ring, a sparkling diamond set in an intricate silver band. It was beautiful, just like last time. And just like last time, it felt heavy with hidden intentions. My mind raced back to the painful memories, the betrayal, the lies, the humiliation. But this time, I wasn't the same naive girl. This time, I knew better. I forced a smile, masking the storm brewing inside me. "Yes," I whispered, sliding the ring onto my finger. His face lit up with triumph, but I saw the flicker of calculation behind his eyes. He thought he had won, that I had fallen into his trap once again. Not this time. The engagement party was a grand affair. Chandeliers sparkled above, casting golden light across the sea of well-dressed guests. Laughter and conversation filled the air as people raised their glasses in celebration. He stood by my side, arm wrapped possessively around my waist, introducing me to everyone as his fiancée. "This is Olivia," he said with that same charming smile. "My future wife." Future wife. The words tasted bitter. I played along, smiling sweetly, but my mind was sharp and alert. I could already feel the cracks beneath the surface of this picture-perfect moment. I caught a glimpse of her across the room, a tall woman with sleek black hair and piercing green eyes. Her gaze lingered on him a moment too long, her lips curling into a knowing smile. My chest tightened. I remembered her from my past life. The woman he claimed was just a friend. The woman who had stood by his side when he shattered my heart. He leaned in, whispering close to my ear, "You're the most beautiful woman here." His hand brushed against my hip, but I felt nothing. No warmth, no excitement, just cold awareness. Later that night, as the party wound down, I sat by the grand piano in the empty hall. My reflection stared back at me from the polished surface, a woman dressed in elegance, but with eyes darkened by truth. He entered the room quietly, approaching with the stealth of a predator. "Everything okay?" he asked, sitting beside me. I smiled faintly. "Just tired." He reached for my hand, lacing his fingers through mine. "We're going to be so happy together," he said softly. My smile sharpened. "Yes, we will." But I wasn't thinking about happiness. I was thinking about revenge. That night, I lay awake in bed, replaying the events of my previous life. How I had trusted him. How I had loved him. How he had torn my heart apart without a second thought. I remembered the tears, the loneliness, the feeling of complete betrayal when I discovered his true nature. I had lost everything, my dignity, my peace, my confidence. And while he thrived, I was left to pick up the shattered pieces of my life. Not this time. I would let him believe he had won. Let him think I was still the same innocent girl he could manipulate. But behind the mask of my smile, I was calculating every step. I would uncover his secrets, expose his lies, and destroy the carefully crafted life he had built on deception. The next morning, I woke up to a flood of congratulatory messages on my phone. My engagement photo was already circulating on social media, a picture-perfect moment of a couple in love. "Lucky girl," one comment read. "He's so handsome," another said. I tossed my phone aside and got out of bed. My gaze fell to the ring on my finger, a glittering reminder of the game I was now playing. I would wear this ring like a weapon, not a promise. Over breakfast, He sat across from me, flipping through the morning paper. "I'm thinking we should set a date soon," he said casually. I sipped my coffee, eyes calm. "Let's take our time," I said. "No need to rush." His brow furrowed, but he quickly masked his reaction with a smile. "Of course. Whatever you want." He thought he was in control. He thought I was still under his spell. I spent the day making arrangements, dress fittings, venue visits, cake tastings, the perfect image of a happy bride-to-be. But behind every smile, I was piecing together his hidden life. The suspicious calls, the unexplained absences, the whispered conversations. One evening, I followed him. He left the house with a brief excuse about a business meeting. My heart pounded as I trailed his car through the dark streets. He pulled up to a high-end restaurant, and there she was, the same woman from the party. I watched from a distance as they shared a bottle of wine, leaning in close. My fists curled at my sides. I took a deep breath, steadying the surge of anger. This time, I wouldn't crumble. This time, I would make him pay. When he returned home that night, I greeted him with a smile. "How was your meeting?" He kissed my cheek.
"Exhausting," he said.
I smiled wider. Poor thing. He had no idea that I knew. No idea that I was already setting the trap. As I lay in bed that night, I felt the cold weight of the ring on my finger. My heart was no longer heavy with sorrow. It was steady with resolve. This time, I wouldn't be the fool. This time, I was the one in control. Trust is fragile, easily broken, and impossible to rebuild once shattered. But this time, I wouldn't be the one left picking up the pieces. The morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains, casting a soft glow across the bedroom. I lay still, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing beside me. His arm rested lightly across my waist, a gesture that once filled me with comfort. Now it felt like a chain. I slipped out of bed without disturbing him. My bare feet touched the cool marble floor as I moved toward the window. Outside, the city buzzed with life, cars rushing down the streets, people hurrying to their destinations. A sharp contrast to the stillness of the room behind me. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message flashed across the screen. "Unknown number. Did you think you could hide from the truth forever?" A chill crawled down my spine. My eyes darted toward him, still sleeping peacefully. My heart raced as I typed a reply. "Me? Who are you?" No response. I tucked the phone into my pocket and inhaled deeply, steadying the trembling in my hands. My instinct screamed that something was wrong, something more dangerous than just betrayal. By the time he woke up, I was already dressed and sitting at the dining table. He walked in, hair slightly tousled, wearing a crisp white shirt. He leaned down, pressing a kiss to the top of my head. "Good morning," he said smoothly. "Did you sleep well?" I smiled faintly, like a baby. He sat across from me, unfolding the morning paper. His eyes scanned the headlines while he sipped his coffee. He looked so composed, so controlled, as if nothing could crack the perfect image he had built. "Busy day?" I asked casually. He glanced up, his smile practiced and effortless. "Meetings mostly." "You?" "I thought I'd visit an old friend," I replied. His brow lifted slightly, but he said nothing. After breakfast, I headed downtown, weaving through the crowded streets. My heels clicked against the pavement as I approached the small cafe on the corner. A woman with auburn hair and sharp green eyes sat at a table near the window. Her gaze met mine, a small smirk curling at her lips. "Olivia," she purred as I slid into the seat across from her. "Sophie." My tone was flat, controlled. "You look healthy," she remarked, eyes sweeping over me. "And you look exactly the same," I replied, my smile sharp. She leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. "I heard about the engagement. Congratulations." "You don't sound surprised." Sophie's smile widened. "Let's just say, history has a habit of repeating itself." My jaw tightened. "Not this time." Her eyes flashed with amusement. "We'll see." I forced a laugh. "Funny. You talk as if you know something." She swirled her coffee, the spoon clinking softly against the porcelain cup. "I know enough." A coldness settled in my chest. I stood up, sliding my chair back. "Enjoy your coffee, Sophie." As I turned to leave, her voice followed me. "Careful, Olivia. He's very good at pretending." My steps faltered, but I didn't look back. Later that afternoon, I found myself standing outside his office building. My eyes followed the rows of dark windows reflecting the overcast sky. I watched as his car pulled up to the entrance. He stepped out, adjusting his tie with practiced ease. But he wasn't alone. A woman followed, long dark hair, tall frame, wearing a sleek black dress. She laughed at something he said, and his hand brushed lightly against her lower back. My chest constricted painfully, but I forced myself to stay calm. I slipped into the building's side entrance, moving quietly through the halls until I reached his office. The door was slightly ajar. I stood just outside, listening. "She has no idea." The woman's voice floated through the gap. "She doesn't need to know," he replied smoothly. My stomach twisted. The woman laughed. "You're playing a dangerous game." He chuckled darkly. "That's what makes it fun." My nails bit into my palm. The mask of charm he wore so effortlessly was slipping, and underneath was something colder, darker. "She trusts you," the woman said. "And that's her mistake." A sharp pain radiated through my chest. I turned away before I could hear more. My heels echoed down the marble hallway as I walked toward the exit, my hands shaking at my sides. That night, he came home late. I sat at the vanity, brushing my hair as he entered the room. He loosened his tie and smiled at me in the mirror. "Long day?" I asked sweetly. "Exhausting," he sighed, stepping behind me. His hands settled on my shoulders. I met his gaze in the mirror. "Who was she?" He stiffened slightly. "Who?" "The woman at your office." His smile didn't falter. "A colleague." I set the brush down, turning to face him. "You're sure about that?" His expression softened. "Are you worried about something?" I smiled thinly.
No.
"Just curious." He leaned down, brushing his lips against my forehead. "You don't have to worry about anything." But I did. That night, I sat awake, my thoughts racing. He was lying. I knew it now, not just about the woman, but about everything. This wasn't a marriage. It was a performance. He wanted control. He wanted to manipulate me into believing the perfect illusion. I wouldn't let him. The next morning, I slipped into his office while he was in the shower. I knew where he kept his files, locked drawer, left side of the desk. I found the key easily enough. My hands were steady as I opened the drawer and flipped through the neatly arranged folders. Bank statements, business deals, property contracts. Then I found it, a sealed envelope marked with a woman's name. My heart hammered as I tore it open. Inside were photos, him with the woman from his office, at dinner, holding hands, entering a hotel room. My breath hitched. Proof. I tucked the photos back into the envelope and closed the drawer. When he left for work, I sat on the bed, the envelope resting on my lap. My hands curled into fists. I wasn't heartbroken. I was furious.
He thought he could deceive me.
He thought I would play along like last time. But he had underestimated me. I smiled darkly as I slid the envelope into my purse. Let him think he was winning. Let him believe I was still under his spell. Because soon, I would turn the game against him. Deception is like a fine thread. Once pulled, the whole facade unravels. And now I held the loose end. It was a cold evening. The city lights shimmered through the foggy glass of the restaurant window. I sat alone at a corner table, my fingers curled around the stem of a wine glass. The crimson liquid swirled gently as I watched the entrance. My heart drummed steadily beneath my ribs. He was late. The waiter approached, his smile polite but strained. "Shall I bring the menu?" I shook my head. "Not yet. He'll be here soon." Or maybe not. A flash of movement at the entrance caught my eye. He walked in, his stride confident as always. His charcoal suit clung perfectly to his tall frame. But he wasn't alone. She followed close behind him, the woman from his office. Long dark hair cascading down her back, a sleek black dress accentuating her slender figure. Her hand brushed his arm as they stepped inside. He leaned toward her, whispering something that made her laugh softly. My stomach tightened, but I forced a calm expression. This time, I was prepared. He spotted me, surprise flickering in his eyes before his face softened into a practiced smile. He leaned down and kissed my cheek. The woman stood beside him, her expression poised and polite. "Olivia," he said smoothly. "I wasn't expecting you." I smiled faintly. Clearly. His gaze sharpened, but his smile didn't falter. "This is Emma, a business associate." Emma extended her hand, the corners of her lips lifting slightly. "Nice to meet you, Olivia. I've heard so much about you." I shook her hand, feeling the coldness beneath her polite exterior. "All good things, I hope." "Of course." He pulled out a chair and sat across from me. Emma sat beside him, crossing her legs elegantly. The waiter appeared with menus, but I waved him off. "I didn't expect you to be working so late," I said casually, tracing the rim of my glass. He chuckled. "A last-minute meeting." Emma's lips twitched. "I'm sure." His gaze darkened. "Should we order?" I leaned forward slightly. "Actually, I'm not very hungry." Emma's eyes sparkled with amusement. He reached for my hand across the table, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. "Olivia, is something wrong?" I smiled thinly. "No, not at all." My phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. A message flashed across it. "Unknown number." "Did you really think you knew him?" My fingers curled around the phone. Slowly, I set it down on the table, face up. He glanced at it briefly, before meeting my gaze. His eyes narrowed. "Who's texting you?" I lifted my glass to my lips. "Does it matter?" His jaw tightened. Emma watched the exchange with quiet interest. "Excuse me," I said, rising from the table. "I need some air." I walked toward the balcony, the cool evening breeze brushing against my skin. City lights glittered beneath the dark sky. I heard footsteps behind me. "Olivia." I turned as he approached. His expression was composed, but his eyes were sharp. "You've been quiet tonight," he said softly. "Have I?" He stepped closer. "What's wrong?" I tilted my head. "Why don't you tell me?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I don't know what you mean." I sighed. "Drop the act." His gaze hardened. "Olivia." "I saw you." I cut in. "At the hotel. With her." His expression didn't change. His stillness was unnerving. "And," he asked quietly. My heart hammered painfully. "And you lied to me." He sighed, brushing a hand through his hair. "You're overthinking things." "Am I?" I stepped closer, my eyes burning into his. "Then explain why you were touching her like that. Explain why she's always by your side." A long pause. His mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing something colder beneath. "You're being dramatic." "No," I said, my voice steady. "I'm being honest." He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "I trusted you," I whispered. "I believed you when you said you loved me." His jaw clenched. "I do love you." I laughed coldly.
No.
"You love control. You love knowing I'm still under your thumb." He stepped closer, his hand brushing my cheek. "Olivia, you need to calm down." I slapped his hand away. "Don't touch me." His eyes darkened. "Careful, Olivia. You don't want to say something you'll regret." I smiled thinly. "Oh, I think I do." I pulled the envelope from my purse and held it out. His expression hardened as he took it. He opened it slowly, his eyes scanning the contents. His jaw tightened. "Where did you get this?" "I have my ways." His eyes lifted to mine. "And what do you plan to do with it?" "I haven't decided yet." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous tone. "You're playing a dangerous game." I smiled darkly.
No, darling.
"I'm changing the rules." His lips parted slightly. "You think you're in control now?" "I know I am." He studied me for a long moment before slipping the envelope into his pocket. "You're not as naive as I thought." "No," I said softly. "Not anymore." He leaned down, his lips brushing against my ear. "Careful, Olivia. You might not like how this ends." I smiled. Oh, I think I will. I turned and walked away, my heels clicking against the marble floor. My heart pounded violently, but my face remained calm. I passed Emma as I left. She watched me with a knowing smile. "Good night, Emma," I said sweetly. Her smile faded. Outside, the cool night air hit my skin. My breath trembled, but I kept walking. My hands curled into fists at my sides. He thought he had won. He was wrong. I wasn't the naive girl he had once manipulated. This time I would be the one calling the shots. And when the truth finally unraveled, he would be the one left shattered. Revenge isn't about anger. It's about justice. And now, the time had come to settle the score. The evening was heavy with tension. The grand ballroom shimmered under the golden glow of crystal chandeliers. Laughter and polite conversations floated through the air, but beneath the polished elegance, I could sense the undercurrent of falsehood. I stood near the edge of the room, my black silk gown hugging my figure. A delicate diamond necklace rested against my collarbone, glinting beneath the lights. My heels pressed into the velvet carpet as I scanned the room. He was here, and so was she. Across the hall, he stood with Emma, their postures close and familiar. His hand rested casually at the small of her back, his gaze drifting toward her with a quiet intensity. My stomach tightened, but I forced my expression to remain calm. Emma leaned toward him, her hand brushing his arm as she whispered something into his ear. He smiled. A cold, calculated smile. The same smile he once gave me when he promised forever. A waiter passed by, and I picked up a glass of champagne. The golden liquid shimmered beneath the lights as I took a slow sip, the bitterness biting against my tongue. "Olivia," a familiar voice called. I turned to see Rachel approaching, her eyes sharp beneath the soft curls of her dark hair. She wore a sleek emerald gown, the fabric trailing behind her as she walked. "You look composed," Rachel said quietly, handing me a folded piece of paper. I opened it, scanning the message. My heart skipped a beat. "Confirmed. Documents will be delivered at midnight." My pulse quickened. "It's happening?" Rachel nodded. "Are you ready?" I smiled faintly. More than ever. Rachel's gaze flicked toward Emma and him across the room. They have no idea what's coming. Not yet. The music shifted to a softer tune, and couples began to gather on the dance floor. He extended his hand toward Emma, leading her onto the floor. They moved in perfect rhythm, smooth, polished, rehearsed. He was always good at playing the part. Rachel leaned in. "Do you think he suspects?" I took another sip of champagne. "He will soon." As the music swelled, I moved toward the dance floor. My heels clicked softly against the marble. His gaze shifted toward me, flicking over my figure with that familiar intensity. I stopped at the edge of the floor, tilting my head slightly. "May I cut in?" I asked, my voice light. Emma's smile tightened, but she stepped back. He studied me for a moment before taking my hand. His palm was warm as his fingers curled around mine. He pulled me close, his other hand resting at my waist. "You're full of surprises tonight," he murmured. I smiled. "So are you." We moved in perfect sync, our bodies brushing as the music guided us. His gaze held mine, steady and penetrating. "You've been watching me all night," he said. "Maybe I'm just curious." "About what?" "How long you thought you could keep up this act." His smile didn't falter. "You're imagining things." I leaned in, my lips brushing close to his ear. "Am I?" His grip tightened slightly. "Careful, Olivia." "Or what?" I whispered. His smile sharpened. "You don't want to push me." I pulled back, my gaze locking with his. "I already have." A sudden shift in the room made his eyes narrow. Rachel stood near the entrance, speaking quietly to a man in a dark suit. He held a briefcase. Emma's gaze sharpened from across the room. "He's still beneath my touch." "What have you done?" I smiled faintly. The truth has a way of slipping out. The music faded. A hush fell over the room as the man with the briefcase stepped forward. He handed a stack of papers to Rachel, who began distributing them to key guests. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. He pulled me closer, his breath brushing against my temple. "What did you give them?" Proof. His gaze darkened. Of what? Your little side business, I said softly. The offshore accounts. The embezzlement. The bribery.
His jaw tightened.
You think anyone will believe you? Rachel's voice cut through the room. Ladies and gentlemen, I suggest you take a close look at the documents you've been given. Some rather unsettling financial records have come to light. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Whispers grew louder. Emma's expression shifted from confidence to alarm. He stepped back, his hand sliding from my waist. You don't know what you've done. I know exactly what I've done. A pair of men in suits approached from the side of the room. Security. One of them spoke quietly to him. His face paled. Mr. Carter, we need you to come with us. Emma hurried toward him. This is a mistake. He turned toward me, his gaze sharp with quiet rage. You'll regret this. I smiled coolly.
No.
You'll regret underestimating me. The guards led him toward the exit. Emma followed, her heels clicking frantically against the floor. His gaze lingered on mine for a long moment before he disappeared through the doorway. Rachel appeared at my side, her smile triumphant. Well played. I exhaled slowly. My hands trembled slightly, but I steadied them against the stem of my glass. It's over. Rachel's gaze softened. Not quite, but you've won the first round. My chest rose and fell with quiet relief. The weight I had carried for so long began to lift. Emma passed me on her way out, her expression tight with thinly veiled fury. This isn't over, she hissed. I smiled faintly. It is for you. Emma's eyes narrowed before she turned and disappeared into the night. Rachel squeezed my arm. What now? I lifted my glass, the golden liquid shimmering beneath the light. Now, I said, I rebuild. I turned toward the grand windows overlooking the city. The lights stretched endlessly into the night, a sea of possibility before me. No more lies. No more betrayal. This time, the future was mine.